From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister D'Souza. This is Washington Watch, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories from the United States and beyond.
This is going to protect every single child around the country from this lawless, unconstitutional, and cruel executive order.
A federal judge has put the brakes on President Trump's efforts to deny babies born in the U.S. from getting automatic citizenship. The judge issued a temporary injunction as he certified a class action lawsuit. Just last month, the Supreme Court restricted lower court judges from nationwide orders but gave wiggle room in the case of class action cases. The most aggressive spending spree on immigration enforcement in U.S. modern history. The recently passed Big Beautiful Bill has handed $160 billion to supercharge ICE. The money will be used to increase agents by the thousands, along with building more detention centers. The funding increase also raises worries about added scrutiny on international students and foreign workers in the U.S. Close but not there yet. This week saw a deadline for a mini US-India trade deal come and go. Indian officials are now expected to continue talks in Washington, D.C. next week. On Wednesday, the US sent letters to 22 countries, including Japan, South Korea, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, regarding facing tariff hikes starting August 1st. India wasn't on that list. Trump has also threatened Canada with 35% tariffs.
President Trump for these floods is a depraved lie, and it serves no purpose during this time of national mourning.
The White House firmly demanding the response to the recent floods in Texas, which has left at least 120 people dead, including many children. Local and federal officials have faced increased scrutiny. If more could have been done to warn people about the rapidly rising flash floods. President Trump and First Lady are visiting the area a week after the incident. The CEO whom Elon Musk hired to run X 2 years ago has quit. No reason was offered for Linda Yaccarino's departure. Separately this week saw an AI model that's on X posting anti-Semitic replies on the platform.
I think it's ridiculous to start a third party. We have a tremendous success with the Republican Party. Third parties have never worked. So he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
And in another Musk-related headline, a widening rift with President Trump as the billionaire said he would launch his own political party. It's been seen as a crucial test case. A federal judge in New Hampshire has blocked Donald Trump's order to end birthright citizenship. Babies born in the U.S. automatically are entitled to citizenship, something U.S. President Trump wants to stop. Groups that would be affected, undocumented immigrants, of course, and many Indians legally here in the U.S. as well who are working or perhaps studying. Now, the legal drama around it remains extremely complicated. Just last month saw the Supreme Court in a case related to birthright citizenship back Trump in his request to curb nationwide injunctions from lower courts. Let's try and make sense of this back and forth, which can be somewhat of a head spinner, but not a head spinner for our next guest here, or our first guest on the show, David Leopold, an immigration attorney. David is also former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. David, thank you for your time here on Washington Watch. David, how did a lower court This federal court judge managed to block Trump's order despite what the Supreme Court said 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, let me get to that. That's a very good question. And let me make 3 quick points before I get there. What we're seeing across the United States right now is an all-out attack on due process. And that's what brings in the birthright citizenship. So it's an all-out attack by this administration on due process. Point 1. Point 2, it's a smokescreen. It's a smokescreen for the fact that they're taking away Medicare from people, that they're cutting education benefits, they're taking money away from veterans, the arts, and on and on. And finally, this is not what America is. This is plain ugliness. And this is not Americans. This country is built on taking care of each other, built on immigration, built on the best and the brightest coming here, working hard, and making a life for themselves and their family. And the ugliness that we're seeing across this country just doesn't fit into who we are. Now, to the birthright citizenship question and the court issuing a nationwide injunction, what the Supreme Court's decision of a couple of weeks ago did was basically turn the tables and send everything back to the lower courts to figure out exactly what to do in these situations. In other words, the court said, well, we're not going to have federal judges generally issuing nationwide injunctions, but we are going to have them looking at other statutes, for example, such as the class action rules. And that's what this judge did here. He said that the class of mothers, so the class of babies, the class of children that were born in the United States, which, as you correctly point out, includes so many South Asians, people from India, who are here studying, who are here producing, who are here adding to the economy and to the fabric of our culture. Their children should be U.S. citizens as well. And so what this judge did was he certified this class, and he put a hold on it.
So basically using a sort of exemption, the Supreme Court order really left room for broader relief through this filing of a class action lawsuit, in this case all kids who will be affected by Trump's order. David, how significant is this ruling then by the federal judge, given that this is most definitely going to be appealed by the Trump administration?
Well, it's significant because the federal judge has begun to extrapolate or define what the Supreme Court has done in the CASA case, which was the birthright citizenship case that was decided a couple of weeks ago. Remember what that case did. They did not decide, the Supreme Court did not decide on the merits of the birthright citizenship executive order. That's the order that President Trump put out shortly after he became president, that said the children of undocumented immigrants are not U.S. citizens, and the children of folks on H-1Bs, visas, O-1 visas, and others, J-1 exchange visitors, are not U.S. citizens. He put a hold on that, this new judge. And what he did was he did it in the context of the Supreme Court's decision. So it's framed in the context of a certified class action. And it's important because it'll be the first framing of the issue before it makes its way back to the Supreme Court. That's why it's important. We all know it's going to be appealed, but it's important for 2 reasons. Number one, temporarily gives some relief to all of us from the chaos that has ensued from this executive order on birthright citizenship, number one. And number two, it begins to carve out the position, the legal position that the Supreme Court will have to adjudicate later in the year or probably next term.
Okay. David, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time here on Washington Watch. In other news now, the Trump administration is turbocharging the enforcement agency in charge of deporting people who violate the country's immigration laws. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, has got a cash infusion of $160 billion. The funds have been allocated as part of Trump's big, beautiful bill, which was recently passed, signed into law. While the Trump administration has said its focus is undocumented immigrants, many worry of a potential fallout on others. Our next guest says there could be consequences for foreign students, H-1B visa holders, and naturalized U.S. citizens as well. Kripa Upadhyay is an immigration attorney. She joins us from Seattle. Thank you so much for your time here. Kripa, how does ICE's
Yeah.
an impact on people here on legal status?
Or good evening for you, sorry.
Kripa, I think we're having some audio. I'm going to ask you that question again. How does this ICE $160 billion budget have an impact on people here on a legal status?
In a myriad of ways, really. So we've already seen previously student visas, or holders of student visas rather, be threatened with removal and deportation for taking part in protests. There is already information out there about increased scrutiny against student visa holders in particular, where they are now mandated to provide complete transparency as to their social media accounts. And so that's going to continue, right? So anybody on a student visa in the US is basically at risk of investigation and potential removal or deportation for anything that may be construed to be a violation of status. That same thing applies also for anybody that's on a work permit, for example. There have been reports recently of H-1B visa holders, particularly from India, that were barred entry into the US because they had spent 60 days or more outside of the United States whilst still on their H-1B status, right? So the enforcement piece is just going to be turbocharged. What that means for employers as well as immigrants that are in the United States, irrespective of their immigration status, is they need to be prepared for enforcement across the board, right? So employers are going to be seeing a much more robust enforcement agency in terms of I-9 audits, in terms of immigration officers appearing at offices, particularly to do fraud inspections to ensure that people on H-1Bs or L-1s are actually working at the locations they're meant to be working at, are actually doing the jobs they're meant to be doing, and are being paid what the employer certified that they would be getting paid.
Okay, so Kripa, for example, I understand that students would face increased scrutiny, perhaps also H-1B visa workers on H-1B visas. For example, they work for a company that sponsored a visa. Sometimes an individual might have a side gig, maybe an unpaid one. Would that be a problem? Say it's someone who's perhaps doing stand-up comedy every Tuesday night, but not necessarily getting paid for it. Would that be an issue?
Yes, the thing about active employment versus passive employment is actually regulated by IRS, not so much by immigration regulations, right? And the way that immigration understands this is anything that construes employment. So in the H-1B space, in particular, let's say you are working voluntarily for an entity, but that entity normally would have paid an individual to do that same work, you can no longer volunteer. That's no longer considered a volunteer job, right? So in the H-1B context, for example, and in the E-2 context specifically, right? If you're doing a side job, even something like investing in real estate, and you are the one that is putting your property on the market, you're the one that's actively involved in that business, that counts as unauthorized employment.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Kripa, for that, for giving us all those pieces of advice and also your insights. In other news now, US President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will be visiting Texas Friday, a week after a deadly flood in Kerr County and other parts of the region. Trump has expressed support for flood alarms in Texas as angry voices grow over what could have been done to prevent the deadly disaster.
The blame game has begun. Could things have been different? Among the over 100 people dead, 27 children and counselors from Camp Mystic, a Christian summer camp for girls. Their cabins torn open by a river that rose from 3 feet to 34 in just 90 minutes. The National Weather Service did issue alerts via phones and weather radios as early as 1 a.m. on the 4th of July. But critics say those alerts were confusing, delayed, or ignored. The most urgent warning describing a particularly dangerous situation came at 4:01 a.m. By then, the river had already begun swallowing cabins. Local officials didn't post evacuation orders on social media until after 5 a.m., far too late. In an area known as Flash Flood Alley, alert fatigue is real. False alarms are common, and many residents say they either didn't get the message or didn't understand it. Democrats, led by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, are demanding a federal investigation into the disaster, asking whether staffing cuts and vacancies at the National Weather Service delayed vital coordination with local emergency responders. Senator Schumer says 2 key roles at the NWS office, the warning coordination meteorologist and the science operations officer. They were vacant. These roles are said to be crucial. They're the ones who translate weather data into evacuation decisions.
Unfortunately, in the wake of this once-in-a-generation natural disaster, we have seen many falsehoods pushed by Democrats such as Senator Chuck Schumer and some members of the media. Blaming President Trump for these floods is a depraved lie, and it serves no purpose during this time of national mourning. Well, the alerts imminently were sent out before the flood when people were sleeping because the flood hit in the very early hours of the morning. So people were sleeping in the middle of the night when this flood came. That was an act of God. It's not the administration's fault that the flood hit when it did.
Years ago, Kerr County considered installing a siren system. It was rejected, called too loud and too expensive. Today, the cost is counted in children's shoes. One Coast Guard swimmer saved 165 lives at Camp Mystic. But as Sergeant Jonathan Lamb said, the last live rescue was Friday. Since then, it's been recovery and heartbreak. Rhythm Arcadia's report for NDTV World.
India is sending another trade delegation to the US soon as both countries try to break the deadlock over key tariff issues. Talks have stalled over duties on auto parts, steel and agriculture. New Delhi wants better access for Indian exports, but Washington is demanding market access for US dairy and farm goods. NDTV's Rishabh Bhatnagar has
what we've picked up from the latest on the trade talks that are ongoing between India and the US is the fact that the Indian negotiating team is set to go back to Washington for another round of fresh negotiations. Now, this is very, very interesting because just a week ago is when this exact same team returned from Washington from the US. And it was expected that a trade deal will be announced around the July 9 tariff pause deadline, but that has not happened. And instead, what we've learned from government sources is the fact that there will be another round of fresh negotiations that was earlier rolled out. It was said that the deal is now done with the technical negotiation bit, and now it hinges on political will. But clearly, that has not happened. Now, why this deal has not happened is because, firstly, the July 9 deadline is now August 1st. That is because the Trump administration, there were a lot of tariff uncertainties coming in from the US, especially with the additional 10% BRICS tariff threat coming in, an additional 200% pharma tariff threat coming in, and also the 50% copper tariff that was announced by the Trump administration. Also, a bunch of new tariff letters were sent out to countries starting July 9th. So a lot of uncertainty around that. On the Indian front, India has not budged from certain red lines like agriculture and dairy. India said that this will remain completely off access for the US, and that is something that has not sat well with the US negotiating team. Of course, there are hurdles, and over the next 20 days, we'll see what sort of a deal the two countries are able to reach to. There is a first tranche deadline around October of this year, and then there is the full deal that will happen later. So we're yet to see what sort of a deal will be reached upon by August 1st.
Now, this week also saw Donald Trump turning up the heat on a global trade war after a 3-month pause on punishing tariffs he announced in early April. Now, on Friday, Trump warned of 35% duties on Canadian goods starting August 1st. Midweek, we saw similar warnings for a host of other countries, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Trump says the EU should also brace for tariff announcements. We also saw warnings over duties on copper and pharmaceuticals. Take a look at what we can expect in the coming days. We are joined by author and columnist Dean Baxendale in Toronto. Dean, thank you for your time here on Washington Watch. Dean, Trump says that he would impose a 50% tariff on copper. It's used in all kinds of things, from weapons, ordinary wiring for people's homes, machineries. You have it. Now, Mexico and Chile are saying they'll find other markets if they can't get around these punishing duties from the US. How feasible, though, is this kind of approach to really pivot elsewhere?
Well, yeah, that's the question. America wants to reindustrialize and bring back its manufacturing base for a host of reasons. We saw the vulnerability of supply chains during the COVID crisis and our reliance specifically on China, and hence divestiture from that Chinese alliance has been taking place for some time. But of course, there's much bigger geopolitical, ramifications of China's incursions in the United States at a whole bunch of different levels in terms of its economic warfare or hybrid warfare operations. The Mexicans and Chileans are going to have trouble finding, huge markets for the copper. But on the other side, the United States needs to recognize that it needs partners like Canada, Chile, and Mexico to create a North American, quite frankly, economic and secure zone that will help, I think, all economies. America can't go on its own. If it wants to isolate itself, we will find other markets. It will cause turmoil in Canada, Mexico, Chile, etc. But again, there is resilience, I think, amongst global trading partners. Hence, our minister, Anand, Foreign Affairs Minister, currently in Asia, looking at negotiating on the ASEAN agreement. And I think that Canada and Donald Trump, quite frankly, is forcing nations to look elsewhere. And I think this will not serve America's best interests in the medium and long term. Might in the short term, he may placate his base and win political points, but he's going to lose the war.
David, we've got to leave it there. And like you said, countries looking at other deals, including Canada, which is looking at a deal with ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much for your time, and we've got to leave it there on Washington Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza in Washington, D.C.